Good morning, Chair Hasid. I've admitted everyone from the waiting room, and we are now recording.
Good morning, everyone. This meeting of the Agricultural Labor Relations Board has been called to order at 10:04. Quick housekeeping, even if you are able to hear me now, please go, if you're in the Zoom application, please look at the bottom of your screen, click Interpretation, and select your preferred language, either English or Spanish. This will ensure you have good audio quality throughout the meeting. I will ask that Santiago relay that message in Spanish as well.
Buenos días y gracias por acompañarnos hoy en nuestra junta. Tenemos servicios de interpretación hoy. Por favor, vayan hacia abajo en su ventana de Zoom. Van a ver un glóbulo que dice interpretación. Por favor, elija el español si quiere escuchar en español. Y aun que quieran escuchar en inglés, por favor, escojan inglés porque les va a garantizar que escuchen bien a nuestra junta. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Santiago. Good morning. This meeting is now, as I mentioned, called to order. First, I will call the roll. Board Member Broad.
Here.
Board Member Flores.
Present.
Board Member Hall.
Present.
Thank you. Board Member Lightstone.
Present.
Also present from our staff for today's meeting is our ALRB Executive Secretary, Mr. Santiago Villa-Gomez, who's providing technical support. We will start today with the open session portion, and then prior to going into our panel, we'll have an opportunity for public comment. We'll then have our informational panel, which I'm incredibly excited about, and then the board will go into closed session. We'll be trying to take a break roughly around every hour mark just to give people a little bit of room. If you are interested in making public comment, members of the public who contacted the board by email or phone will be placed in the public comment queue and then called on in the order received. If you did not previously contact the board and wish to make a public comment at the end of the meeting, you may do so in one of several ways. You can make a request in the Zoom chat function or raise hand, or you can email Santiago to be placed in the queue. We'll give more advisories on public comment at that time. We do have limited capability to manage participation during the meeting and during the public comment periods. We ask everyone who is not speaking to place their phones or Zoom on mute and wait to unmute until you are called to speak. These instructions are also available on our agenda, which is posted online at alrb.ca.gov. Okay. All right. Our first agenda item is to approve the meeting minutes for our most recent meeting on July 12th, 2023. Can I have a motion?
I'll move it.
Second.
All right. Moved by Member Lightstone, seconded by Member Broad. All those in favor say aye.
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 Thank you. Minutes are approved. Okay. Next, I have the chair's report. The next agenda item is the chair's report. We have a lot going on. I am incredibly excited. First, I am pleased to share that Board Member Hall has officially been confirmed by Senate Rules and the full Senate Committee, yes, for another term. We're very excited to have him, our institutional memory. Congratulations, Member Hall. Look forward to continuing to work with you. Additionally, since our last meeting, the board released its first ever decision regarding a bona fide union for purposes of signatories to a labor peace agreement for the Medicinal and Adult Use Cannabis Regulation Act. I say MCRSA, we'll see how others pronounce it. This was a landmark decision. Promptly after our decision, the Department of Cannabis Control sent a bulletin to all licensees alerting them that the board had determined that ProTech 33 was not a bona fide union for purposes of MCRSA. And my understanding is they'll be following up with licensees that specifically have those agreements and will be issuing, I believe, what they call notices of compliance. This really underscored the need for us to continue to do education and outreach, especially since this is a very new process that we're doing. We learned a lot of lessons. Really appreciate the General Counsel staff good work during the investigation. I'm currently in conversations with the Department of Cannabis Control to have ALRB and possibly our sister agencies join for an education and outreach event at the Cannabis Advisory Committee meeting. I believe the next one is September 7th. So we're going to try and do a presentation there and hopefully be able to kind of just raise more awareness about the Act. So really proud of our staff as well who helped us navigate this new process. Additionally, we have been on the road. I had the pleasure of attending an event hosted by the UC Merced Community Labor Center. They held an event From Crisis to Action, Mobilizing for Equity, Resilience, and Recovery in Rural and Farm Worker Communities. And this was their opportunity, and I will ask to share screen. This was their opportunity to share with foundations kind of a live briefing of their farm worker health study. Oh, this is from a different one. And we visited several farms, heard from many of the community-based organizations that were on that tour, traveled through Tulare and Kings County, and were able to see Tulare Lake, which I wanted to share some photos with our folks here. Let me see. Share. Okay. Well, let's see. This is from a different trip. Okay, let's see if it's getting that. All right, well, it keeps wanting to see the other photos. I apologize. I will try and share those with you later. But it was a great trip and really informational. And the organizations were able to demonstrate to a lot of these foundations how they work and how they serve as trusted messengers with the community, and also have kind of a worker-led, people-centered organizing model. And it was just really interesting to hear about how they're handling both these storms and now the intense heat, as well as the flooding and the impact of Tulare Lake. So I want to give a special thank you also to the UC Merced Community Labor Center leadership for putting the event together. It was a major undertaking and very successful. We were joined by other state agency partners, particularly Labor Agency, Sebastian Sanchez, the Health and Human Services, Dan Torres, US EPA, and then also our partners at the Governor's Office of Emergency Services, who had been facilitating calls, particularly during flood response. Additionally, last week, Board Member Flores, General Counsel Montgomery, and I had the pleasure of touring several operations, courtesy of the California Fresh Fruit Association, as well as other organizations. Some highlights: we were able to visit a pear and apple grower here in the Delta and Cortland, Green and Hemley. We met with Virginia, who is a sixth-generation family farmer in the area. We had a really enjoyable visit, and a highlight for me, and I think for our general counsel, was Virginia sharing, we really emphasized with her that we want to continue to work together to provide education and outreach and see how we can partner just to benefit farm workers. And she really emphasized to us how in the last few years she's had a really good working relationship with the ALRB, and I wanted to share that. That was a real highlight for us and a testament, I think, to particularly our general counsel staff who've worked with her. We then traveled to Los Banos and visited Bulls Farming Company, which farms cotton as well as nearly 24 other commodities, from melons to carrots to garlic and others. We met with Canon Michael, and he really emphasized how they see themselves as stewards of that land and how they work with both the community and the state, and they're involved in a lot of different things, from how to conserve water to keeping, flyways for waterfowl and other things, as well as raising amazing food. We then visited Specialty Crop Company in Madera and met with Kevin Herman. He had us sit in on his monthly health and safety tailgate meeting, and we were able to talk to some workers there. Given the high heat, that was how they decided to use that day. He grows figs, pistachios, almonds, among other things, and he really focused on how he and his company give back to Madera through education, through scholarships, through their company, serving on his local community college board. One thing that he highlighted that really stuck out to me is they have a partnership with Camara Health in order to provide more affordable and accessible health care to their workforce. And that's been particularly important given the loss of Madera County Hospital. And so we talked about some of those challenges and some of the struggles they're dealing with as they try and support their workforce in their location. He's also starting to experiment with growing agave, which I thought was really cool. The next day, we visited Cobblestone Fruit in Sanger with the leadership of Citrus Mutual and saw they're building a new packing and cooling center. that's in process to hopefully come online this harvest season. I want to give a shout out. So many people made this tour possible. It was so informative. Board Member Flores and Julie Montgomery and I really enjoyed our time learning more about the industry, about some of the challenges and all the different things that growers are dealing with, and trying to see how we can partner again to support their workforce, which is their most, one of their most important assets. So I want to thank the president of the Fresh Fruit Association, Ian LeMay, their government relations advocate, Adam Borchard, Katie Condit of the American Pistachio Growers, and Jacob Villagomez and Casey Creamer of California Citrus Mutual. Thank you to all the growers that opened up their facility to us. I know that's not always easy, and we really appreciated it. And it was really informative for us. And then a really special thank you to Louis Brown and Taylor Roshan of ConSource and Conway for all your work to organize the tour. It was a lot of work, a lot of coordination, and they made it happen, and it was really enjoyable. And then you're going to hear more about this later, so I'll only briefly touch on, I was able to join the General Counsel staff, particularly General Counsel Montgomery, earlier this week for a really critical settlement in Mauritson Farms that's gotten a lot of great press, and there was a press conference there, and I just want to highlight how amazing a case that is. I've been hearing from all corners. Really want to shout out our Santa Rosa staff, Jorge, Asina de Luna, Karen Santana, and others, if I've been remiss, who worked on that case. It's our sister agencies are looking at it. I've heard, informally from USDOL, from other community groups. It's a really landmark settlement, and a great win for workers, and just was not an easy win to get. So really appreciate that. And that concludes the chair's report. Next agenda item is our Executive Secretary Officer's report on unfair labor practice cases, elections, and complaints.
Thank you, Chair Hasid. I am going to be reporting on an amended complaint, board decision, and 2 pending matters. Since our last board meeting, there's been 1 amended complaint issued in Equispace Harvesting, Inc., and the respondent there grows fruits and vegetables, including cauliflower and broccoli, in Santa Barbara County. That amended complaint was issued on July 10th. Turning to the board's decision, which you spoke about, and it is Professional Technical Union Local 33, 49 ALRB number 3, which issued on July 6th. There, the board determined that the was not a bona fide labor organization. And the 2 pending matters are Trifanuki Farms, involving 40 ALRB number 4. It's an administrative law judge recommendation to seek enforcement of a subpoena ducis tecum, and that recommendation came to the board on June 23rd. Finally, Ocean Mist Farms, involving 46 ALRB number 5, and that is the regional director's request for subpoena enforcement that was filed on July 18th. This report, as well as other reports and related press release for the board decision, are all found on our website at alrb.ca.gov. That concludes my report. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, our next agenda item is our Administrative Services report. We do not have that today. And the litigation report, which we do not have today either. And then next is our General Counsel's report with General Counsel Julie Montgomery.
Good morning to all. I'll move this a little closer just to make sure. So I'm going to keep my report brief today, given the packed agenda for this meeting. But I wanted to start out by talking about what Chair Hasid alluded to, which is the Mauritson Farms press conference that we had on Monday, and that was in Healdsburg, which is around where the company is and where the workers all worked. And so we met with North Bay Jobs with Justice, who is a nonprofit organization there who actually brought the workers to the employer to talk about concerns at the workplace, and thereafter, of course, the following season, the workers did not return, were not invited back, and that precipitated the unfair labor practice charge with the ALRB, and of course, we filed a complaint and settled it, as I know Deputy General Counsel Herrera reported on at the last board meeting. And we did obtain $328,000 in back wages and some front pay for the entire crew of H-2A workers. I'll just mention that it was 6 of them who came forward to raise the issues, but the company didn't invite any of the crew back, and so we did get the back pay and wages for all of those workers. And we also, our staff in Santa Rosa conducted a reading this past week for the crews at Morrison Farms, and they did our notice reading to 3 crews, 43 workers, and they posted 10 notices. So they were out in the field talking to Morrison's current employees this past week. So that's a really important part of our remedies that they were able to effectuate. And I just want to say that it was a real pleasure meeting with Chair Hasid and our staff in Santa Rosa, Yesenia De Luna, who's an attorney in Santa Rosa, but also currently the Visalia Acting Regional Director, and then Jorge Lopez Espindola, who's an attorney. And we talked to North Bay Jobs with Justice about supporting workers in the area, in addition to just coordinating the press conference. And there was a lot of media presence, and we've had some really good media coverage of the case since then. So it's really exciting, and just kudos to our staff for achieving that landmark settlement and protecting some of the most vulnerable workers that we have in California, which are the H-2A workers. Just a couple of other things that we've conducted some trainings and presentations, or our staff has been doing that all over the state as usual, but I'll just highlight that they did a presentation to a statewide promotora group and other CBOs as part of a 7-series workshop hosted by a group called Promotoras con Alma, and that was in collaboration with Cal OSHA and the Labor Commissioner, and that was on July 12th. And then last week, or actually, I think it was for today, they will provide an in-person training to residents at a migrant and seasonal farm worker informational event hosted by EDD in Ukiah, which is in Mendocino County. So we're collaborating with EDD on that. And last week, our staff up in Santa Rosa did a Spanish radio interview together with staff from the Labor Commissioner's office on the program Líderes del Futuro at Radio KBBF in Sonoma County. So I'm really pleased to see that our staff is collaborating with our sister departments and agencies to get the word out to farm workers. Thank you. Any questions?
I don't have any questions. Do any of my colleagues?
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Julie. All right. And next, we have our legislative report with Chief Board Counsel Todd Ratchin. Todd?
Hi, good morning. Thank you. There's a legislative report that's available on the website. There's not a lot to update for this meeting. The one real update involves SB 544, which is the bill which would make some of the Bagley-Keene reforms, allowing teleconferencing and video conferencing permanent in place of the provisions that just expired at the beginning of this month that allow remote meetings. So that has been referred to the Assembly Committee on Appropriation.
Thank you very much. Next, we have our regulations report. And I understand, is the committee tabling or presenting on the AB 113 regulations, or tabling that?
No, we're, oh. So that's all. Okay. Can you hear me?
Go in that one.
Oh, in this one. Okay. All right. Excuse my incompetence. So here's where we are on AB 113. We're sort of ready to go with the substance of it. The area that we need more time on is the regulations around bonding and how that works, and there are very practical issues that we have to understand. For example, there is a provision in the law that requires us to accept cash in lieu of a bond. So we have to figure out what the actual system will be to accept cash from members of the public, and it could be, or parties, it could be a substantial amount of cash. And secondly, unlike some of our sister agencies in DIR, for example, like the Labor Commissioner, the bonding there all goes through the court. And in our statute, the bonding, we hold the bond. We're the bondholder. So we have to figure out how to hold cash in an account that pays interest. So we have practical issues to figure out, and when we figure those out, as soon as we figure those out, we'll be back. We're hoping perhaps in our next meeting or the meeting after that. So other than that, we're kind of ready to go, but we can't really separate the issues. So
that sounds good. A few comments. One, and I see our Labor Commissioner has joined us here in our Glendale location. Probably not the time for this, but I think their licensing schemes, garment, car wash, and farm labor contractor licensing all require bonds that I think they hold, that may be informative. And I know there have been various legislative movements over the years to kind of help work through challenges. So I do recommend talking to their licensing unit and perhaps their public works unit as well. Additionally, I think talking to Department of Cannabis Control, since they deal with cannabis licensees and it's an all-cash industry for the most part, they might have some valuable information as they work to collect, they collect taxes and fees and whatnot. Additionally, one thing I was thinking about, I'm sure many of you saw there was a recent article in ProPublica about the success that UFW has had in New York State with their version of majority sign-up or card check. If we haven't already, I would be interested if the subcommittee could reach out to New York. I know the systems are very different, but I'd be curious to see what their card looks like and what, if any, lessons learned they may have, and for you all to report back on that. I don't want to hold anything up, and I know our law is very different than theirs, but I think if there's any tips they have or just insights that they've experienced, I'd be curious to hear about them.
Okay.
Do any of my colleagues have any comments or questions? Okay. All right, next we'll open it up for public.
Chair Hasib, excuse me, can you hear us? We lost you over here.
Okay, can you hear us now? Great, that's excellent. Okay. All right, and confirming no one in the queue.
No one in the queue.
Okay, we are going to take just a little break here so we can get set up, and then we will kick off our panel. So give us just a few moments. Okay, thank you, everyone. I will now turn over to my colleague, Board Member Cynthia Flores, to introduce our informational panel, and I just want to extend gratitude to Cynthia for all her work to coordinate this group. I'm very excited about today's presentation.
Thank you very much, Chair Hasid. It is with great pleasure that I have worked on this panel, second part of a two-part series. And first of all, I want to thank the panelists for taking the time to be with us today. We appreciate you making the time to share your knowledge and expertise and bringing that to us this morning so that we can have a better understanding of how the ALRB can meet its mandate. And a recent UC Merced study approximates that 75% of California's agricultural workers are undocumented. Having served as a removal defense attorney and having represented undocumented immigrants before administrative law judges, I've witnessed the stress that immigration status has on individuals and their families. From the stress of imminent deportation and family separation to the fear of losing their jobs and livelihoods. And so in an effort to better understand the unique nature of a majority immigrant workforce, the board decided to host a two-part informational panel series on the impact of immigration status in the farm worker context. A couple of months ago, the board held an informative panel which served as a primer for today's conversation. We had a lengthy discussion about the different types of statuses from DACA to H-2A to undocumented status and the impact immigrant status has on farm workers and their ability to exercise their rights, the potential for retaliation, wage theft, and even losing your job. In that conversation, we identified the need for state agencies and other organizations to build trust among immigrant workforces to better meet the needs of these communities. In light of that, today's panel will focus on the resources and safeguards each entity uses to ensure farm workers are able to exercise their rights, regardless of immigration status. Our guests will discuss their efforts, programs, and/or initiatives that they use to mitigate the impact of immigration status in the workplace. Our presenters include Labor Commissioner Lilia Garcia Bauer, who's actually with us today in the LA office, so thank you for joining us, Commissioner. Julie Montgomery, our very own General Counsel. Brian Little, Director of Employment Policy at the California Farm Bureau Federation. Sebastian Sanchez, Deputy Secretary for Agriculture and Immigrant Workforce with the Labor and Workforce Development Agency, and Dr. Saraí Martinez, Executive Director of Centro Binacional para el Desarrollo Indígena Oaxaqueño. Each panelist will have approximately 10 to 15 minutes to present, and we do note that we will hold questions until the end of the presentation. All righty then, we will start our presentation. Labor Commissioner, the floor is yours. And again, thank you for being with us in person today.
Absolutely. Good morning, everybody. Very happy to be here and thank you for allowing me to participate in person without having to get on a plane. It's really lovely. So I'm happy to be a part of this conversation because there's a lot of learning that we have to continue to do. And as government organizations, it makes so much sense that we collaborate, that we are thought partners in looking how to address these systemic harms that go back to remnants of slavery. Right? We're talking about populations that have been systematically excluded from protections. Right, and not just in our jurisdictions, but as government, we own police harassment, chronic discrimination, poverty, institutional racism. We own all of the things government has done wrong. And part of our work in helping our government heal and helping our communities heal is recognizing that government also has a historical role in restoring trust and faith and in building resilience in our communities. So I joined the Labor Commissioner's Office 4 years ago, and I want to share a little bit about my background that will help lay the context for the initiatives I've implemented. So previously I worked for a janitorial watchdog group. And this organization was charged with eliminating unfair competition. And we had a board of contractors who funded this labor management committee pursuant to a collective bargaining agreement. And so this is not a legal aid organization. This was not a touchy-feely service organization. These contractors, we were an insurance plan. We needed to go after those actors that were undercutting them. And every day there was constant bleeding. Every day they were calling us about contracts they were losing. So when I first went out in the field, right, never having worked in janitorial or having worked for a watchdog organization or a union, I saw that you have 2 minutes to talk to a janitor at night with their predatory employer breathing down their neck and trying to make connection in 2 minutes. Well, all of my college education did not help me. When I was paired up with a member, a janitor who went out and did this, I saw the power of their life experience to be able to connect authentically with the worker. And that is what opened the door for them to consider, and we're not government, just a watchdog group saying, we want to help you, right? Just for them to consider. It took so much time. And then, so that made me realize that I focused on hiring janitors as our investigators. So that was the best decision I made. And to date, 23 years later, the MCTF continues to only hire janitors, former janitors, as their investigators. And then 15 years later, we engaged in a campaign to expose unreported rape in the industry. And here I was much more experienced advocate, investigator, leader, but I also know what I don't know. And taking on this issue of rape was very serious for me. And I was very concerned we didn't have the right tools. So I reached out to a community partner for them to come in, who they live and breathe domestic violence and trying to end violence in our communities, our poor immigrant communities. And then we went through a training program with them. It's called the Promotora program, right? Where you get from the very community you're trying to impact, you work with their leaders to develop a skill set to be able to thoughtfully talk about the issues that you're engaging, but you have to go through it. It's not, let me come in as a trainer and learn, but as a participant, you have to sit through and go through this process. It was a very vulnerable process. It was very intense. And the woman told me, oh no, you two, you sit down. Because I thought like, okay, what am I? I'm gonna work next to you, right? But no, everybody had to take a seat at the table. And so there too, I learned that it was the poor immigrant woman, it was the ununionized woman who was never gonna get a union again because of the nature of the industry and the type of employers she worked with. They were the ones who were able to get women to come and speak out. It wasn't about laws, and it wasn't about government, and it wasn't about a new process, because we know rape has been illegal for a long time. So why is it that these communities don't speak out, which is different than for farm and workplace protections, because they've been excluded for so long. So they didn't have the right. So the very government continued to harm them. But when it comes to sexual violence, those laws have been on the books for some time. And the reason what we have in common with the farm workers and the immigrant women janitors is that they both have immigration vulnerability, as you had mentioned, and they both don't trust their government, right? And the communities that they live in, unfortunately, and I say this respectfully of my Mexican immigrant community, we have a toxic culture, right? That's very misogynistic. And like the US culture, it's very much blame the victim, right? It's, you look at how you're dressed and that's why this happened to you. Look at how you were talking, how you were acting. That's why this all happened to you. right? So all of that perpetuates that vulnerable communities do not, they just go further underground and they have more exploited employment. So with that in mind, when I came to the Labor Commissioner's office, I was confident, and because I worked so closely with this agency for 20 years, that we needed to become trauma informed. We needed to take a step back from the laws we were implementing and understand ourselves, how we interpret and process information that we receive, how we consider the public as they're standing before us, and how the public processes and reacts to information we put out. And we have to understand that everybody has experienced so many traumatic things that coming in high and mighty, very assertive, very authoritarian, may trigger a construction worker who maybe had a violent family separation, with a parent going to jail, or an immigration separation, or a garment worker who had been violated sexually several times, right? So all of these things we need to make room to consider. And being trauma informed means that we are going to invest in ourselves and checking our own baggage that we bring to the table and trying to neutralize that as best we can, and then become skillful communicators in choosing our words, our tone, our body language, and think about how we engage with the public. So we launched our effort to become trauma informed in October of 2020. And one of the first places where I took some action was in our outreach, right? Because a lot of times people think that outreach is warm and fuzzy, right? I've had a lot of prosecutors tell me, I don't have time to be a cheerleader, right? But we all know, those of us who come from these vulnerable communities know that you cannot exercise what you do not know. So outreach is foundational to be able to have strategic enforcement. And we need strategic enforcement because we don't have enough of us to go around. So we have to be very thoughtful about where we invest our resources. So we changed our outreach in that I didn't want to hear anything about labor codes. We have to think about, what does our audience need to know about the information we're conveying? For a worker, they have to know how to defend themselves at work, what actions they need to take to protect themselves, because that is the most important thing. For an employer, they have to understand what are their obligations and how could they best protect their profit to not have to invest in legal fights. So they need to understand how to train their supervisors and how to monitor and keep track of things. And we developed new training material catered to addressing those types of issues. Another thing that we've done is we've launched a couple of initiatives under our Reaching Every California campaign. And I picked that name very intentionally because the way historically the Labor Commissioner's Office has operated, and I'm speaking prior to Secretary Sue's terms as Labor Commissioner, we've been reacting. It's whoever comes through our front door. That's who we deal with, right? Or whatever suits invite us to go talk to them, that's where we go. When in reality, that means we're excluding the majority of the populations. And statutorily, we have an obligation to ensure resources for the poorest communities, which are the hardest to reach, which are the ones who are not going to walk in our front door. So by Reaching Every Californian, I'm reminding our team, we have a duty to go out into these communities and build new pathways. And so we have 5 initiatives. I want to call your attention to 2 of them. One is our Workplace Rights Ambassadors Project. And so the purpose of the Workplace Rights Ambassadors Project, or WRAP, is to train community organizations, acknowledging that we also don't have the time to sit outside of a building for hours as advocates can to make that contact, right? So I'm also aware of our limited resources, so we have to be strategic. So it's best for me to build capacity in the organizations that respond to domestic violence survivors, that respond to homeless individuals, second chances workers, workers with access and functional needs. I want to be inserted in their menu of responses. That was my timer, 1 minute, of responses to the problems that come in the front door. Because it's that social worker, it's that organizer, that staff member who, when they're dealing with a single mom at a shelter and she by half chance mentions she couldn't pay her rent because her check bounced. Well, why is her check bouncing? And I don't need the homeless shelter to be the expert, but what I want them to do is know, oh, I'm going to call the labor commissioner's office. And I don't want them to have to wait on our public information line. I want them to have a live body that they can connect with. So the goal of our RAP program is to invest in a long-standing relationship between a liaison from the LCO and an ambassador in the CBO. So when we engage in our RAP program, we approach an agency, a nonprofit, we explain the program, and we ask them, do you want to commit to this? And my ask of them is, you have to give me one staff member who is going to be highly responsive and meet with our team, because we have a strategy session. Another piece of being trauma informed means we can't assume as government we know what the community wants and needs. They may have, for example, the Black Workers Center is a great example for me. They are one of our partners. They're like, I don't have time for workplace rights with our shop stewards, right? So what we have developed with them is we're available as they need us, right? Because they're prioritizing other employment, building employment opportunities. And so we go in and we provide the retaliation training as it's needed, right? We help them think strategically about how we can be a resource. What would a legal clinic need? So we have to be flexible and be at the table with the community to make sure that that the programming we're developing, they are bought in and they see it as valuable. And I know I'm almost out of time, so I'm just gonna jump to highlight that our investments need to be long-term. You know, I'm going to be critical of one of my own initiatives, our caravans, right? That we initiated in November of 2020, and we have regularly done for 3 years now, right? And I think these are a useful tool. However, we need to do a lot more, because the caravan is an infusion of attention for a 24 to 48 hour period. And then we all know memory goes, right? And their lives continue. So that's why I established the Wage Theft Monthly Clinic in Santa Maria, because that was a valley where there were 30,000 immigrant families in less than a mile radius of this church. And I wanted to test, if we come every month, how will the community respond? We are 9 months in it now. We just had our 8th clinic on Monday. And we had 25 individuals there, and now they're filing claims. When we first started, we had 6, and it was painful. I saw the bloodshot eyes, their fear in talking. I had a knot in my stomach, and I needed to tell everybody about it. I don't think I called Victoria, but I called Katie, I called Natalie, and this was a problem. But so we're investing in that community, and I'm not just there once a month. I do radio every month. We're canvassing our team, and Kel Osha generally is with us. We go out and canvass the day before, and we meet with community members. I recently met with our leaders to do a 6-month evaluation. Like, how are we doing now? What do we need to adjust? We have other leaders like Líderes Campesinas who are also at the table. ALRB, thank you, as regularly, Jessica is regularly participated. Cause is there as well. So I think part of our challenge is we can't just check a task off as government, like we showed up and we tabled. What I'm looking at is how can we infuse significant resources? Could we build community offices, have team members in the CBO offices? Can we build trilingual, multilingual recruitments from that very community that we're trying to impact? So that we're not an implant, but rather we're working with somebody from that community. And I know this from my own life experience that I shared in the beginning, and also you could drop me anywhere in LA and I'm generally gonna have a good hunch of what needs to happen, right? So as government, we can't replace that, right? And we know that government programs and initiatives could be very transient, they change. There's a new leader, there's a new flashy title. We have to deliberately work against that and pick initiatives that we know we could invest in and that we commit to long-term. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was fantastic. So I'm gonna go ahead and then turn it over to our next panelist, Julie, our general counsel.
Oh, can you not share it yet? Thank you. Yeah, wait to share the screen. Thanks. I first want to mention or draw attention to ALRB's unique position in the state, which is that we are the only state or governmental entity that in California that is specifically charged with achieving justice for farm workers and to achieve stability in agricultural relations, which means we are exclusively focused on the farm worker population and the agricultural industry. So that puts us in a unique position of specializing and focusing on a group of workers who are, the vast majority are undocumented. I think someone mentioned that the UC Merced Labor Center estimated it at 75%. And so that is a reality that our staff is dealing with every day. We know that workers' undocumented status impacts decisions they make in their daily lives, including whether to speak up, whether to do anything about the working conditions and living conditions that they are experiencing, whether they're even going to seek help with us or Labor Commissioner or anyone else in government. And as we know, there's a lot of fear and reluctance to come forward, largely due to that vulnerable status. So similar to Commissioner Garcia-Brauer, I've had a background where I've worked and been trained by folks who have been promotoras and done leadership development with groups of low-wage workers, specifically farm workers, and I worked with someone at California Rural Legal Assistance Foundation, and we had a grant project to do leadership development for farm worker women in the North Sacramento and Yuba County area. And so I also acknowledge the importance and the power of developing and training local farm worker leaders to be the ones who are talking to folks and helping them to understand what it is we do, what their rights are, and also I've had former clients that I used to represent become advocates and talk about their experience. And so I think at ALRB too, when workers who we've helped come forward and can share their experience and talk to other workers about what it was like for them to go through our process and how we help them, then I think that speaks volumes more than anything we can say ourselves. So it is a central part of my mission and our general counsel program's mission to really further develop that model. And I know we've been very fortunate to have some leadership at our Labor Workforce Development Agency as well, who's really been, who has a common vision with all of this, which is to forge relationships with our local leaders, so local nonprofit groups and leaders who are really dialed in with the community, with the farm worker community, and who have that trust, have that relationship already in place. And so when we can go in and build that relationship with these groups, and they trust us and know that we're going to get results for workers, they are way more likely to refer folks to us or to file charges themselves when violations occur and workers come forward. So really, we're very committed to furthering that mission, and we have four full-time staff who are exclusively dedicated to our outreach team, and that is a part of what they do, is helping to build those relationships, provide training materials, and connect our staff with these different groups. And I know statewide, they've been out doing a lot of this work, and we've been doing it for the past, I think it's been almost 3 years since we hired our first full-time outreach staff member. So that is continuing. The other thing that I'm very committed to doing is making sure that the people that we hire at the ALRB, when we have opportunities to hire folks, that those people are culturally competent and have an understanding of the issues that farm workers face. And I can say that I would say our staff does have deep knowledge and understanding and experience with the farm worker communities. And some of them have come from the communities themselves and done farm work. Others have worked in agriculture, or they have family that's worked in agriculture. Or they could be like me, somebody who's just advocated for workers over the years and had some wonderful mentors. And so they gain their experience that way. And so our staff is knowledgeable and culturally competent. We have 2 staff who speak Mixteco and come from indigenous communities, and so there's that additional competence as well. And we continue to offer trainings and resources for staff to learn about these issues and continue to gain competence. And they're also on the ground talking to workers regularly, like I said, so that they can hear the issues and know what people are facing. And they're regularly out there building those relationships. And so just for outreach too, just on immigration status, which I know immigration is the topic of this panel, I just want to talk about how we strongly emphasize that immigration status does not matter. And you can put that slide up now, thank you. And this is in all the outreach we do. We have that message that workers have rights under our act, regardless of immigration status. And so actually this first slide that's up is part of a PowerPoint presentation that we do, our staff does, or actually, okay, I'll start with that one. So this one that's up is a promotional flyer for a radio show that our staff, they just did. The last one they did was just last Thursday, and this is in the Sonoma area. And as you can see at the top, for those who understand Spanish, it says, tenga papeles o no, todos tienen derechos. And in English, that means whether or not you have legal documents, everyone has rights. And so that was that is our message in this promotional flyer for this radio program, Líderes del Futuro, is doesn't matter if you have papers or not. So that's just something that we emphasize. You can go to the next. And then this is a slide of that we do part of our presentations to different groups, either nonprofit groups or groups of workers, and we have our two staff members who are trilingual in Spanish, English, and Mixteco, and we have here, we serve farm workers regardless of their immigration status is number one, and then a few other groups, and we also say we speak Spanish and Mixteco, and we offer interpretation in other languages. You can go to the next slide. And then we have a lot of print materials as well, including this one. You just scroll down. This is in English and Spanish, and as you can see at the bottom, we have your immigration status does not matter. So anyway, and then there's the same flyer in Spanish as well. And so that I just wanted to put that out there, that in our outreach, we're front and center with this message, very clearly communicating that we are serving everyone regardless of status. Oh, and my timer just disappeared. Make sure I stay on track here. Oh, here we go. So I just wanted to start out by saying, yeah, in outreach, we are committed to that. In addition, as you know, Commissioner Garcia-Brauer mentioned, we also make sure that we're going out to folks because we have 5 field offices throughout the state, and they are positioned in rural areas and agricultural areas for a reason. However, we know the state is huge, and we can't be everywhere all at once, and we don't expect workers to travel 100 miles to come see us. So we do have a staff member based in Santa Maria, and she is there full-time and meeting with workers there regularly, and she does office hours at a community-based organization 2 days a week. And so she is out there in the community, and since we've had that presence in Santa Maria, our charges and the information and cases that have come in from that area have greatly increased. So we think that is an important model. We've also had staff doing office hours regularly in rural Ventura County, and we've gotten more cases in that area, and then also in Coachella area as well. And so we're looking to expand that model in a lot of other areas so that we can have staff go out and do periodic office hours in conjunction with nonprofits so that we can increase access to workers and make it easier for them to come to us. Just a few words too about investigations and hearings and how we support workers and protect issues relating to immigration status. So in investigations, we do not ask about immigration status, and we're very clear with all of our materials that we give to workers and all of our communications that, again, that we're not going to ask. We don't need to know. We don't want to know. If they do end up revealing their status to us, we do not share that. And if somebody asks for relief, like they want support for a U visa petition or deferred action, we have protocols in place to keep that confidential. And we also do not reveal workers' names unless they are a charging party, in which case they do have to be named. But if they are a witness, we will keep their name confidential until they testify at hearing, and we do not disclose that information in discovery. The only exception to that, or main exception to that, would be if we end up settling the case prior to hearing, then if we need to reveal a name to effectuate a remedy, like to get a check cut to somebody or to get them reinstated with the employer, then of course we will. But prior to that, we are very protective of workers and their identities so that they feel more comfortable participating in our processes, and they're not going to refuse to participate because of that. And then if people still feel uncomfortable, we do take charges from nonprofit organizations. And then also, just to end, I'll say that in our hearings and processes, we also take a firm stance on protecting workers from intimidation. And we have had some instances where responding parties have tried to gain information about status or question workers about their status in a proceeding or in discovery. And we've taken a very aggressive stance on that, and we refuse to respond to such inquiries. And then we've also filed motions in limine, which is a legal motion that we file prior to hearing, asking for an order, like a preemptive order, that from the judge, that the responding party and their lawyer are precluded from asking any questions relating to immigration status. And this can be something that's not even direct about immigration status, but it could be if they're gonna ask about why did you work under a different name or things like that that are aimed at getting an immigration status. We have filed successful motions in limine to preclude that information from coming out, and so in that way we want to protect workers from being intimidated and discouraged from participating in our processes. So, and most of our cases, I'll just mention, most of our cases do settle. So the vast majority, at least 2/3 of our cases settle, and so most workers don't ever have to come forward and testify in hearing, and we get them remedies like we did in the Maritson Farms case that I spoke about earlier today. But that said, when we do go to hearing, we also take aggressive measures to protect those workers, and I have protocols in place, and there were some in place even before I got to the ALRB that I've maintained, and we've been doing regular trainings with staff on these issues as well. So I'll end there since I'm about out of time. Thank you.
Thank you. And Member Flores, how would you like to proceed?
If it's okay with, the presenters, I'd like to maybe take one presentation before we have a quick, break, if that's okay. So I believe the next presenter would be, Brian Little with the Farm Bureau, Foundation.
Great, thank you.
Oh, Federation, excuse me.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right? Good. My name is Brian Little. I'm with the California Farm Bureau Federation. For those of you who might not know, Farm Bureau is the largest general interest agricultural organization in California. We have a county farm bureau in 53 of 58 California's 58 counties, and there are 52 state farm bureaus, including Puerto Rico, across the United States, and an American farm bureau in Washington, D.C. I came to California in 2008 after having worked at the American Farm Bureau for about 8 years, and after that, working at the Labor Department doing congressional affairs, and finished my time in federal service as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Occupational Safety and Health at federal OSHA, and kind of got a little bit of a crash course in occupational safety and health and how all that works at the federal level. When I came to California, I was struck by the relative absence for many, many years of meaningful progress on immigration reform legislation. When I started at American Farm Bureau in 1994, my predecessor told me that the most important thing I would do during my time at American Farm Bureau would be to figure out how to fix the agricultural labor problem and the immigration problems related to it. Here we are, 30 years later, the problem still hasn't been fixed, and I hope that's a testament to how politically intractable and difficult the problem is, as opposed to my incompetence at trying to fix that problem. But we are still pretty much where we are, but I still think that the best way to address some of these issues that concerns people have raised about people being hesitant to come forward and to claim their rights and what's legally due to them, having to do with their legal status, the best way to fix that problem is to get them legal status. I don't know that there's a political path to do that anytime in the near future, so I may be retired and our kids might figure out how to sort that out by the time all is said and done. But I think that's probably the best path, and we've been consistently supportive of legislation, both at the American Farm Bureau level in Washington and California Farm Bureau. And I'll be perfectly candid with you, Farm Bureau being Farm Bureau, we have debates in the family about where we ought to be on policy issues. So we're not always as consistent as I would like us to be, but I can assure you the California Farm Bureau has been consistent for 35 years in support of legislation at the federal level that would finally resolve the problem and make sure that we give agricultural workers a path to legal status, hopefully with a path to citizenship after that. And by the way, just as sort of an aside, something that a project the California Farm Bureau recently embarked on with the National Immigration Forum in Washington, D.C., was a program to allow people who are green card holders who would like to regularize their status and become United States citizens to be able to do that. We provide it as a member benefit to our members to be able to provide that as a benefit to their employees. Our thinking on that was that hopefully key employees who have been in the United States for a while, had gotten through the process of being able to get a green card, and maybe were interested in getting citizenship, perhaps to be able to offer derivative status to family members, be able to travel more easily, be able to work more easily, would be interested in that, and that for an agricultural employer, that would be an opportunity to be able to show an employee that they're valued by that employer, because that service, while we make it available as a member benefit to Farm Bureau members, California Farm Bureau paid for that. They had to write a check, the NIF, to be able to provide those slots in that program. It's web-based, cloud-based, and designed to help people who might have limited English skills be able to sort through the process of being able to change their legal status and become U.S. citizens if they're green card holders. It is not an easy process, I think, if you've ever known anyone who's tried to go through that. And we've done our best to try to provide some help to do that. I do public policy stuff for California Farm Bureau related to agricultural employment. I think all of you know that, because I've been here a few times and talked to a few of you and spent a little bit of time with some of you. And there's a lot of stuff going on at the state level, and there always has been, and I think there probably always will be, given that we're in California. But the other hat that I wear with Farm Bureau is operating a small for-profit company that California Farm Bureau owns called Farm Employers Labor Service. Farm Employers Labor Service's purpose is to help agricultural employers understand the many things that the state and the federal government require them to do, expect them to do, and be able to do that effectively and be able to make effective use of a relatively limited labor force that presents some unique challenges for any employer. So the illustration I try to use with people very often, I joke with people that with my government relations hat on, Farm Bureau's job is to explain to people who think what agriculture is, to explain what agriculture is to people who think that chocolate milk comes from brown cows. And so that's a challenge, because most people, we've gone from having 80% of us who are on farms and feeding ourselves on farms to less than 0.5% of Americans who produce all food for all the rest of us. That creates challenges in terms of helping people understand agriculture. But the other piece of what I do at Farm Bureau with Fells is to use the illustration of a farmer, a middle illustration of a farmer wearing a denim jacket, and this front pocket of his jacket is accounts payable, and this front pocket is accounts receivable, and his back pocket of his jeans is the HR and safety department. He is a one-man band. He has to do everything, or she has to do everything on that farm, make sure the whole thing runs, and at Fells, we try to provide them with resources and products and services to help them be able to do that effectively. We do that partly with field staff. I have 4 field staff who are all bilingual and bicultural. All of them have either had close family members or have family background being agricultural employees. All of them also have experience being in senior management in large agricultural business concerns. So they understand both ends of the transaction, if you think of it that way, between a farm worker and a farm worker's employer. And what the need is for an employer to be able to make a profit, to be able to make payroll, to be able to employ people, as well as the concerns of agricultural employees. And being bicultural and bilingual, we can serve as a bridge between our workforce and the people who operate farms. I think that's a very useful thing. And Julia's comment about emphasizing so heavily the fact that the law doesn't care what your immigration status is. When I talk to my staff, I find that they tell me that they say the same thing regularly to the employees of the employers that they work with, that help them understand that, no, it doesn't matter what your immigration status is. The law still protects you in exactly the same way as it protects anybody else. It's interesting that we still have to explain that to people at this late date, but it seems that we do. So we also do products. If you've been on a farm, you've probably seen our laminated compliance posters. You've probably seen some of the training videos that we've created. We've sold enough posters, I think, to cover California 2 times over with our posters over the last 40 years. And it's a very common product that you'll see out there. I publish a newsletter every month to help agricultural employers understand what's happening, the news, and then some practical things about how you manage new challenges and new regulatory commitments that you have to meet, new things that you're required to do, and how the law evolves and changes with court decisions, with changes in legislation, changes in regulation, to try to help them stay up to speed with it. It isn't easy, and I wish I had $1 for every time I've had a farmer tell me if I could, number one, all I ever really want to do is farm. Well, you can't do that in California. You've got to deal with what California gives you. And the other was, if I could pick up my dirt and move to Nevada, I would. And of course, they can't do that either. So to the extent that they want to do business in California, most of them are willing to, and they usually say that with a smile on their face, expressing their frustration with the things that they have to deal with and try to do correctly. And as you probably know, there are some significant penalties associated with not getting these things right. So most of them are keenly interested in trying to make sure that they do these things the right way. I made a New Year's resolution many years ago that I would never go to another policymaker and say, if you do this thing you're thinking about doing, you'll put our members out of business, because it never happened that way. They usually figured out a way to muddle through, and the usual result of whatever bad thing we thought that policymaker was considering doing, usually what it winds up being is, and I would ask all of you to keep this in mind as well, is the job that doesn't get created, at least not California, winds up being created in Oregon or Mexico or Arizona or someplace else. The Christmas bonus that doesn't, I'm sorry, the holiday bonus that isn't given to that worker at the end of the year, the raise that worker doesn't receive on the basis of his own merit because the employer has to use that money to pay for some other mandate that's been imposed upon him. So those things have real effects. And I think that what employers do to provide jobs, to make payroll, to do the things to help agricultural employees provide for their families while farmers provide for their own families, and in their own communities, it's worth recognizing the significance of that. It's worth recognizing the contribution that these people make, because sometimes agricultural employers feel a little bit, well, like I said, to the extent that some of them would like to be able at times to move their dirt to Nevada, I think you can probably understand how they sometimes feel a little bit challenged in terms of trying to farm in California. We are working every day to try to help ag employers understand what it is they're required to do, helping them be able to do that in an efficient and effective way, to be able to effectively employ their employees, be able to hopefully employ more of them, and employ them in ways that make better sense in terms of both their business and be able to do those things in ways that will be better for their workforce. So I think with that, I will stop.
All right, Member Flores, I think we'll do a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back for the rest of our presenters. So everyone can kind of stretch, and we'll be back here about 11:27. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful. So now that we're back, we're gonna jump right back in. I believe the next presenter is Sebastian Sanchez with Labor Agency.
Thank you, Cynthia. Good morning, so. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sebastian Sanchez. I am the Deputy Secretary for Immigrant and Agricultural Workforce at the State's Labor and Workforce Development Agency. Thank you for the invitation to speak. Want to share with you all broadly some of the ways that we are thinking about addressing how we can improve access for farm workers, and particularly for immigrant farm workers, to both understanding what their laws are, what the laws are that protect them, as well as how to access support for the services. So I want to start, I think, over the past year at Labor Agency, we've been going through a process, particularly after the shootings in Half Moon Bay and down in San Diego, of thinking about how can we improve How can we better coordinate across our agencies? You heard today from our general counsel at the ALRB, as well as our labor commissioner, about the activities that they're doing. And it's been a real pleasure to see the way that we've been working together across departments to really try to address some of the issues. But I want to just kind of give a global vision. I think that's the opportunity that I have at the labor agency to kind of see the work that everyone is doing and really find the common threads that we can really start pulling on to address some of the major issues that farm workers have when confronting the challenges of accessing services. Over the past year, through a farm worker collaboration call that we have, where we invite all the entities across the state really that address farm workers, but particularly within the labor agency family, we've been trying to identify the issues and what are the strategies that we can address. And I think really comes down to two major issues that we've found. One is, how can we better improve the comprehension that farm workers have of the laws and the enforcement system? And then the second is, how can we allow them to access the offices and the spaces where they can actually have their claims be processed? So one major issue when addressing comprehension of laws and enforcement is really looking at what kind of content are we providing to farm workers? What kind of information? How are we presenting that information to farm workers? I think it's common knowledge that a lot of our legal protections can be fairly complex, and the FAQs that we draft to address them have to be legally accurate, which can then mean a rather high-level reading comprehension being necessary to understand that. We've also only recently started investing heavily in digital content. The ALRB really has been committed to doing that work, as well as the Department of Industrial Relations, but it's still fairly new. Through our Safer at Work campaign, through COVID, we really also heavily invested in trying to identify materials. I know the ALRB and the Department of Industrial Relations had also previously contracted with UC Berkeley to do a report on what that content looks like. Cal OSHA has committed to doing an online training academy. We've had the Department of Industrial Relations has a language access initiative, and as the Labor Commissioner pointed out, we really leaned heavily on the caravans that the Labor Commissioner proposed, and kind of jumped on her idea and started asking the ALRB and EPD and Cal OSHA to also join in on those caravans. But as has been noted by both the Labor Commissioner and the General Counsel here, there continues to be gaps in how we can continue to drive that information. We still don't have that wide distribution and consistent distribution of the content that's being created. We still need to do a better job at simplifying content, having that at a lower reading level. And I think there's still a lot of work left to do to make that content be culturally competent, make sure that it's accessible to farm workers from the backgrounds that they may have. So that is one area where we need to focus on doing some work. And we're trying to address that by seeking additional investments in comms, seeking additional investments that allow us to continue to do the work that the ALRB and the DIR and the Labor Commissioner are doing in terms of creating additional content. Another major issue is really workers, and these are two issues. Workers don't know where to get information about their particular problem. And then not only that, they don't understand where they need to go to actually file a complaint. We have hotlines. We have created some online navigators that are subject specific to supplemental paid sick leave or different paid sick leave options available to workers during COVID. We've tried to
Excuse me. Sorry, we lost you here.
All right. Is that better? Can you?
Hello?
You can hear now. Yes, yes. Sorry about that. Sorry to interrupt.
This and that.
Okay, go ahead, Sebastian, sorry.
So, as I said, we've continued to build relationships with community-based organizations, and we've continued to think through how we can use an MOU between our different departments to ensure that any concept that's put out addresses the needs of farm workers holistically. I think a common question, we've been recently meeting with a group of advocates in the Central Valley who, rather than asking us, like, what can the ALRB do or what can the Labor Commissioner do, the question they pose to us is, if a farm worker is being pressured to work and feels that they are at risk of losing their job, who can they turn to? And that really contemplates the participation of our various enforcement. ALRB, Labor Commissioner, Cal OSHA all could play a role in addressing that. And I think we need to think through when we deliver information to workers that it shouldn't just come from the perspective of one enforcement entity or one particular law. We need to make sure that farm workers understand the variety of options that they might have, and that requires us to continue to work collaboratively to create content, to break down some of the silos that exist amongst our different departments. We need to improve the navigation that we have for our websites. We need to improve the hotlines. There are too many hotlines for farm workers to call. There's a hotline for Labor Commissioner's office, for Cal OSHA, ALRB has a line, and while all of those serve a purpose, a lot of times farm workers just don't know which one to call and which one makes sense. We need to also just increase our physical presence in rural communities. As the Labor Commissioner noted, caravans are great, but they're only for a 24 to 48-hour period. We need to establish that regular presence so that farm workers can reach us. I'll talk a little bit more later on about how accessing our physical offices continues to be a challenge. And we really need to ensure that referral system, when a worker comes in and files a complaint with any of our offices, that it gets directed to the correct location rather than asking the worker, him or herself, to find out where they need to file that complaint. I also want to note, recently the governor announced an investment in providing direct legal services for immigrants, undocumented farm workers who may be engaged in workplace investigation. I think this is an example of the ways that we want to move forward in terms of investing in additional support for farm workers, making sure that when they initiate a complaint or a claim, they have that support so that we have a more perfect complaint or claim. I think this can both address not only the burden it places on our frontline staff to figure out what a complaint is, it allows them to process it more quickly, can help us address some of the backlogs that all our enforcement entities face. So I think we really need to think through how we can invest in organizations that can provide that front of the line support to farm workers when they initially file a complaint. So some of the strategies we're thinking through is cross-training our staff across all departments, ensuring that Cal OSHA staff understand what rights and protections there are under the ALRA, and making sure that PDD's migrant seasonal farm worker outreach program staff understand the protections that workers have during extreme heat situations. And this is something where we're actively engaging in that cross-training. We want to set up a more formal structure where there's regular and ongoing cross-training among staff. That's going to require some work, but I think ultimately it will benefit farm workers and it will benefit our team so that we create a no wrong door policy. Whenever a farm worker approaches any of our entities, they will be able to be provided information about what protections they may have, what they can do to actually address that. That also requires us really developing this intra-agency referral system that we can use to ensure that there's follow-up on cases. It's not just sending a case over to another entity, it's ensuring that that first point of contact that the worker has with the state, the worker can continue to communicate with that person and understand what's happening with their case or their complaint. It's developing reporting systems to really track what the outcomes are of those cases. We need to improve and really coordinate on strategic enforcement. There are various, the Labor Commissioner's Office has had a very successful strategic enforcement partnership with community-based organizations. that has really helped address on a systemic level some of the challenges that low-wage industry workers have. I think we can do some more of that and really think through about how we can further coordinate with community partners on identifying cases, gathering information about cases. So again, we have a stronger case to start off with so that our frontline staff are not spending as much time doing some basic research and some basic understanding of what the facts are within a case. We need to better engage external enforcement, so we've been doing a lot of work connecting in the cannabis field with the Department of Cannabis Control. We engage heavily with the Department of Labor, but I think it's something that we need to continue engaging on a more formal basis in terms of brainstorming on cases with them and really identifying impactful cases. And as I noted earlier, I think we need to improve those legal services for workers, and we are looking to identify funding sources for community-based organizations to, again, conduct some of that intake and referral and hand off strong cases to the state. We also need to develop, continue to invest in developing outreach content that's easy to understand and guides workers to relevant information. Public-facing materials, we need to continue to simplify and really work with community partners to ensure that it's accessible to workers and to people with low reading levels and LEP individuals, English proficient individuals. I think our websites overall, we need to invest in a client-centered website. Again, as I noted, that group that asked us about when farm workers are pressured, workers don't approach things with, I have a concern about concerted activity in the workplace. They have a concern about, we're being pressured to do X, Y, Z, and we're being retaliated. And we need to guide workers to where they need to go. And we've created some websites, the state has created some websites, like the Safer at Work website that does that, and we need to continue to invest in that. We need to create online tools that help workers navigate those spaces, and again, that requires investment in that labor agency. We're committed to requesting those funds, but we really want to invest in other digital outreach tools similar to the WhatsApp tool that the ALRB has piloted this year, to really think about other ways in which we can reach farm workers. And I know I'm running short on time, so this will be quick. With regards to accessing our physical offices, it's no surprise to anyone here that in most of the ag regions throughout the state, workers have to travel long distances to access any office. Whether we're looking at the northern counties, where there are few and far between offices, or even in the Central Valley, where we struggle to have, I think, between Fresno and Modesto, there just aren't that many offices. Calosha is launching 2 new offices, but in the Santa Barbara region, there are limited offices as well. And these are heavy farm worker spaces, and we're just not physically present in those spaces. So one of the things we've been thinking about and looking at the model that, again, the Labor Commissioner has pioneered with the Santa Maria Clinic, is thinking about how we can possibly work on creating one-stop shops where we have our various enforcement entities go together and do a clinic on a regular basis, again, creating that regular presence in the community, working with a community partner that can help us access those workers. That, of course, requires a lot of investment and a lot of time, requires additional resources, which, again, the Secretary has indicated his support in seeking. But we really want to continue to explore those models of how can we ensure that we are available where workers are present and are easily accessible to workers in a space where they don't feel intimidated by a government building. Something else that we need to address is that our offices close at 5 p.m., right? Workers need to access our teams after work hours. That can also be done through the clinics, and again, that's part of the Santa Maria Clinic that the Labor Commissioner has working. It's not during work hours, it's after work hours. Another major thing we need to address is Indigenous language speakers. I know that Julie, the General Counsel, mentioned that ALRB has 2 staff that speak Mixteco. That's it. No one else has staff that speaks indigenous languages. That's a huge gap that we need to figure out how to address, and whether it's continuing to invest through our workforce development systems in developing students that have indigenous backgrounds into becoming interpreters. We're continuing to invest in that, but also just supporting organizations that do that work. I think we need to think through how we improve the number of staff that can actually communicate directly with these workers, as well as invest in effective interpreting systems and make interpreters easily available to our staff. I think the last thing that I'll note is, again, going back to our creating a no wrong door policy. We've had different ideas be thrown out, whether it's the ALRB offices serving as hubs, where DIR divisions can provide services. I know that there are other ideas about creating satellite offices. I know that the ALRB has a staff attorney working out of cause, a couple times a week. I think these are ideas that we need to think through of how we can continue to explore so that we can continue to make that accessible and reduce the challenges to accessing our services, to accessing our staff. And that's something that, again, at the Labor Agency, we're committed to pursuing funding to support the efforts of our various departments and divisions to address those challenges. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sebastian. And we are going to be hearing now from our final speaker, Dr. Martinez with CBDIO. Thank you for joining us.
Can I ask a question, Sebastian?
Member Lightstone has a question for Sebastian before we go to Dr. Martinez.
If we can just hold the questions until after the presentation, because we're already running a bit behind schedule, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Martinez.
Thank you so much. Yes, that was okay. So again, hi everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation. My name is Saraid Martinez. I'm the executive director with Centro Binacional para el Desarrollo Indígena Oaxaqueño, which translates to the Binational Center for Indigenous Communities. We work in 2 major agricultural regions, the Central Valley and the Central Coast. And we serve primarily indigenous farm workers. And again, I'm also from indigenous background from the Zapotec region from the state in Oaxaca. However, our organization not only serves community members from the state of Oaxaca, but also from other states in southern Mexico, like Guerrero. And throughout the Central Valley, we have found that we have a very diverse indigenous farm worker community, not just from those 2 states, but from Chiapas, from Hidalgo, that they don't speak Spanish or their Spanish is very limited. Our staff speaks 13 unique languages within the 2 regions. So we're able to reach multiple communities that don't speak Spanish or prefer to speak in their native language. I think for us, again, as I was thinking of what to say, I think a lot of the speakers already covered so many of the points that I had, but definitely want to reemphasize. I think prior to COVID, there was little to no investment or attention to indigenous communities, at least through the state, at least based on what we have seen, and even as organization, there was not really that attention. So COVID, in addition to everything that brought, I think it had really highlighted our community because it has been disproportionately impacted. And we, Centro Binacional, have been a partner with some of those initiatives that started through the state, through COVID, through the caravans, through CWAP. So it has really seen that investment. And we know that the gap is too wide and it's not enough to just invest also in organizations, but also to look into the state agencies to figure it out. How do we work together as partners? How do agencies also improve and build their own capacity to support Indigenous farm workers, because it's hard to just leave it up to community-based organizations, because again, we are all stretched thin to do all this work. So just wanted to say that. And then also I think Sebastian mentioned something that is also very important, is how do we work not in silos, but like to collaborate. There's a lot of confusion on farm workers to figure out who to go to when there's violations. And just even for myself to navigate and learn what each agency does is a lot. But again, I know for immigration, we know that it's really at the heart of all the different vulnerabilities of our community. And farm workers and Indigenous farm workers have many intersections that continue to oppress them, and also to like to not let them speak up when there's like violations in the workplace. There's definitely people feared, and employers also use immigration status as a way to keep workers from speaking up or from organizing. Immigration is a real threat, and it's being used to cause intimidation. And we have done a lot of outreach through the work that we do with CVBIO. We have, again, through the different initiatives in partnership through the state and with other programs, we have a team of Indigenous community workers that go out and provide that information, and that continue to uplift the fact that, you know, immigration should not be a barrier to speak up, especially in the state like ours in California, where we have a lot more protections that we need to use to protect their rights in the workplace. I also want to recognize that, you know, because we work in 2 regions, the Salinas area, Watsonville area, and also the Central Valley, we have seen that there's definitely a lot, the history and the resources and the political context, it's a lot easier, or like the protections of workers are different in the coast than in the Central Valley. We have found a lot of more violations of labor rights, wage theft that are happening in the Central Valley. And there's like really a gap of services in all the rural towns that have not been addressed. So glad to hear, you know, the new offices for Kalosha to be in place in the region, but there's definitely a lot more of more gap that needs to be filled by all the state agencies in the Central Valley. And when I say, so we have definitely, again, work with multiple agencies, definitely working with Commissioner Lilia to provide some of those caravans, but also to do a lot of training with the staff. So we cross-train our staff to make sure that everyone knows what are some of the rights and continue to do those, that information. We also have work, and I know that we, through collaborations with different partners, we're trying to work with agencies like Kalosha to make sure that our community knows how to navigate the state agencies, and that also to submit complaints. I think, again, Sebastian touched about this before, but the way workers, or the options the workers have to submit complaints are not adequate based on the level of schooling that farm workers have, and like the times, and just like everything to access services that we really lack at the state level. So we need to figure it out. How do we address some of those concerns? Because we are doing the outreach, we are informing workers, and then there's a barrier once they know their rights and they try to access kind of solutions or get a solution for the complaint, and they just can't get through a fast solution through the state. There's a lot of trust that needs to be built, but we can't do that if the response takes months or weeks to get to workers when they have a complaint. We are aware of all of the different gaps in hiring practices. So I think as agencies, that's something that we can together look into it, because it also prohibits for many of our folks, Indigenous young people, to really have access to state jobs, to apply and to have more an adequate workforce through different state agencies. And I also know that has been one of the barriers to fill out some of those vacancies at the state level. So I think those are like some of the practical things that we can do, because again, like we do the outreach, we promote the services, we promote the rights, and then once they reach out to state agencies or submit a complaint, they can get through, and that just like does not help building the trust that we need. So ensuring that that is happening is crucial to continue this partnership or collaboration, and to continue to promote and like ensuring that the laws get enforced, because it's not happening. And then I think for undocumented workers, we have, and I think, we have a history of exclusion and racism, especially as farm workers, as workers. With Centro Binacional, we continue to reclaim our knowledge as farm workers, as stewards of the land. And like, there's no coincidence that Indigenous farm workers are predominant workers in the agricultural field, because that's what we know how to do. However, it has not been valued, and it continues to be left behind through different efforts to recognize that labor. And through that, we have seen the devastated gaps that have left COVID, the storms. As we know, the work of a farm worker is not a year-round work. It is by season. So workers really have to work hard to earn enough money to save up for the winter session, or like when there's a gap in employment. And through the storms, we saw that, people couldn't go to work, not because they didn't want to, but because the rain really impacted when the season started. It just had an impact that we couldn't feel as an organization. Through the droughts, it was the same thing. And we know that climate crisis is here. So something that Centro Binacional has been working to end the exclusion of workers and to have a safety net is working on the Safety Net for All campaign to ensure that undocumented workers have access to unemployment benefits, because we know that through those times it's really hard for workers to sustain themselves, to sustain their families, especially again, because agriculture is not a year-round, and it's not a well-paid job either. So having a safety net for them to reach out is important, because we know that one-time support is not enough. And I know that has been the response of the state, but we know again that it is not enough for workers. And the last thing I wanted to mention that we can work together with the state and the different state agencies is really to support and protect farm workers and undocumented workers from different federal policies that continue to displace workers and that continue to terrorize workers. Something that does happen a lot in the fields is the constant increase or threat to ignore the current workforce because we are not working on improving wages and improving benefits, so then we retain and sustain the workers that we have in the fields, but we are resourcing to bring in guest workers, and we have seen an increase of that through the different parts of the state, and that is displacing workers and then causing more wage competition, I guess, among workers and what growers are using to keep wages low. Is this constant threat of like, well, we're gonna bring guest workers, either you take this or we're bringing workers. Again, there's some violations there, but we know that that's like a threat that we have seen through the different areas that we work, especially in the coast, where, even through the storms, we couldn't house people in hotels because they had already kind of been those contracts to bring guest workers to house them in there. So I think as a state, we need to be better at protecting workers and our domestic workers and trying to make sure that we have enough protections. And if we do bring workers from Mexico, that it is that one, we figure out a way to advocate the state to make sure that we legalize or provide documents to all of the workers that we have, and that all the workers that are bringing have the right to have a path to legalization, and that are able to switch from employment if they're with a grower that is not respecting the rights and the commitments that made when they came here. So again, there's a lot that I can go on and on, but I know I also have another commitment. So I'm gonna stop here, but happy to connect with any of you all. And again, thank you so much for giving me the space, and happy to continue this conversation as well.
Thank you, Dr. Martinez. Really appreciate you taking the time and just all the work that you do through your organization for your communities, both in the Central Valley and along the coast. I don't know, does anyone have any questions for Dr. Martinez? Because I know she has to go in just a few moments.
Well, I have a question. Are there social tensions between the H-2A workforce and other immigrant farm workers?
Can you elaborate a little bit more on social tensions?
Well, that is, do they feel they're in conflict with one another for jobs, in competition for jobs? Does that result in any kind of mutual hostility? Or do they tend to see themselves sort of in the same boat?
I don't know if there's hostility. I just know that we have heard from workers that, when they try to negotiate a piece rate or some type of increase in the work that they're doing, they're often threatened to say like, well, either you take this or, we have more workers that we can like bring to do the work that you don't want to do. So like it's being used. I don't know if I have heard like there's that specific like, we don't like not that among each other, but it's mostly like we know that in workers have said that it's being used to not support like their wage increases or like to be threatened. So
there is the implicit or maybe even explicit threat that employers can go get H-2A workers in response to other farm workers asserting their desire to increase their compensation, for example.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I see our folks in Glendale have raised their hand.
Hi.
Did you want
to? Member Hall has one quick question if you still have time, Dr. Martinez.
Okay, sure. How about Senator Hall and then Julie?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Martinez, for your work. I know you mentioned that you have approximately 12 or 13 different indigenous communities that you work with. Do you have what is the approximate population of the indigenous community, or do we know that?
Yes, so at Centro Binacional, we're trying to figure out how do we do another census to ensure that our community gets counted. The last farm worker specific census was conducted in 2009. And at that time, it told us that 165,000 indigenous farm workers were working in the California fields. However, since then, there hasn't been a statewide effort or even like a way to try to like document the number of indigenous farm workers that we have in the state. However, we have seen an increase based on the networks that we track and also from other states that are recent arrivals from Mexico. And we also have a a problem of documenting the background of the community, because a lot of the times, you know, we are seen as Mexicans or Latinos, so there's not really a standardized ways from like multiple agencies or to document the presence of Indigenous farm workers. So that the number that we do have that was documented was 165,000 Indigenous farm workers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. It's very loud. Thank you, Dr. Martinez, for this information. It's really wonderful to have you here. I just wanted to make a quick comment about your mentioning that workers are threatened when they are negotiating, say, a piece rate or other better wages or other working conditions, and then the response is, well, if you don't like it, we can just get HQA workers if you prefer, and you don't have any jobs, so you better just stop asking for more. Those are among the core rights that we protect, is for workers to come together and negotiate such working conditions without threats or any other suggestions or actual or threatened retaliation. So I would just encourage that if you or the people you're working with do experience any of those situations, that you contact us at the ALRB, and we would be very happy to talk to workers, let them know their rights, and if they want to file a charge, or even if the workers are afraid to file a charge. We've had a number of charges filed by nonprofit organizations, including CAUSE, MyCOP, and most recently the North Bay Jobless Justice, who are representing workers in the Sonoma-Napa area that we got the settlement for just recently that I was talking about earlier. So just really encourage you all to partner with us on that, because that is highly concerning, and it's exactly those kinds of threats and tactics that really chill workers from exercising their rights, and that's exactly what the ALRB wants to be there to help address and stop that kind of behavior and violation.
Sounds good.
Dr. Martinez, I know you have about 1 minute left, but I just want to say, for a future conversation, we, you know, as our panelists have shared, and I know it's been talked about in other forums, we are really wanting to recruit from a broader candidate pool, and also help break down barriers to state employment for a variety of workers, and especially to increase our language access capacity. And so I'd love to work with you and just have some further conversations. And I know some of those conversations have been going on with some of our sister agencies, and I think our labor commissioner would also be interested in joining those conversations. But just, that's been a huge concern of the legislature as well. That was a huge focus at our budget hearing, where all of our sister agencies were there, and Chair Carrillo was asking, you know, how are you expanding language access in a variety of ways? And so I really want to continue to think about that with you and see what specific issues may be a barrier that you've been experiencing. So thank you for your time.
Thank you all, and happy to continue the conversation with the language access. We are we're convening a group, a statewide group, to talk about specific language access across the state agencies. We have developed a best practices, so happy to share that with you all, in working also with the new language access manager at the state level through the my God, I forgot the name, but we will definitely connect, because we do want to make sure that we are developing those best practices with states to figure it out, because it's not just about interpretation, but it's also like, how do we make, I think again, Sebastian mentioned that, like the website, the navigation, the support, so it's a lot that overlaps, so happy to connect on some of those things too.
That would be great. Yes, GovOps, I think, has created the GovOps, Government Operations Agency, to try and use full terms. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. I'm going to turn it over. I have a few questions for everybody, but I want to turn it over to Board Member Lightstone. I know you had a question for Sebastian.
Yeah, or it might be for the Labor Commissioner as well. It's just a question about the, this is on the investigation side when workers do come forth. It strikes me that there still are some pretty significant barriers. in terms of investigation, we have a contract, we have lots of undocumented workers, and we have lots of them working for farm labor contractors. And it seems, it's just my impression, that the farm labor contractor licensing system doesn't really track very well or make available in a database where contractors are taking workers. So lots of investigation efforts seem to be foiled or caught up and delayed by trying to figure out where workers were working and where the contractors were working. So I guess I would suggest that we relook at the farm labor contractor licensing system to see if it can help facilitate investigations, so there isn't this huge undertaking to figure out where workers were working and where the contractors were taking them when there is a case under investigation. And also, sort of parallel to that is the EDD maintains a database, and I know they raise issues about access to it. Every employer in California reports all of their employees' payroll regularly to EDD, and the barriers ought to be cleared for both of those things so that investigations can be expeditious when farm workers, particularly farm workers employed by farm labor contractors, have a case under investigation. That's my question or comment.
I will defer to the Labor Commissioner on the Farm Labor Contractor Services registration. I think she certainly has a better understanding of what's feasible there. I think with regards to your second point on accessing some of the EDD data, I think that's where that MOU that we executed amongst all our departments, where we had all legal counsel for every department review, all leadership is reviewed. We want to make it really clear that all of this information we should be able to share it, we should be able to access it. Now it's up to us to build the infrastructure to make sure that information is, that sharing of information is actually happening. But fully agree with you that we need to give our enforcement teams access to all the information available to identify proper defendants and identify who should be held responsible for wage and workplace complaints.
Thanks. That's a good step.
Great, thank you for that question, Ralph, and it's nice to see you. It's been a long time. As you know that we did require locations to be identified in the janitorial registry. Now, that information is not publicly available, but employers do have to identify some information about where their operations are. I think unfortunately we were limited to branch offices, but we were trying to grow from the limitation what we heard on the farm, right? In farm labor contractors, I agree with you that limits, it's more investigation we have to do. And as Sarai referenced, farm workers work for short periods of time, right? And they're on the move. And the FLCs move with them as well, right? As with the seasons. So I think from an enforcement perspective, I agree with you that is something that we should have identified on a requirement on our registration requirements. That would need legislative reform, right? It's not one of the current mandated pieces of information that have to be provided.
Thanks. If it's a problem we should solve it and go as far as we can without legislation, and then if legislation is needed, then we can call that to the attention of the legislature, I suppose. Thank you.
Definitely.
The statute to ensure, to just double check, but I do believe we need legislative reform to obtain that information. Now, making it publicly available is going to create a different complexity, right, to pursuing the legislation. But I think from the purposes of investigation, we just need to have that information. Like we see in janitorial, we have a little more information, and then we can share it, right, amongst our partner agencies as we need.
That sounds like a good model.
Yeah, Thank you. Labor Commissioner, I have one question for you, and I realize the investigation may still be pending, but as Sebastian mentioned and as others have discussed, the Half Moon Bay incident, I think, was just a really, well, it was many things, but obviously a very tragic event, and I know there's still some lessons learned from that, and some investigations are still ongoing. But I'm wondering if you can share some general lessons from your team's experience there about using trauma-informed practices, or how you have been working to establish trust with that population, knowing that many of those workers may not have had many of them have been undocumented, and obviously went through a very scary and traumatizing event.
Yeah, absolutely, and I don't have an update. I know our investigation is ongoing and we have confirmed some violations, so we will be taking further action. But I think on the point of how are we being trauma informed with that horrific situation, a lot of it meant that we needed to take a step back. We were quick to do an inspection, right? We went out, I believe within 3 days of the incident, but the pressure, our priority was the employer. Our priority was to put the employer on notice, to issue subpoenas. We learned more about the employer's operation, that they had a Southern California location. And so I wanted us to protect the information that was in the Southern California location, which happened to house all of their HR information, which likely would be the payroll records, employee lists that we would need. So I was concerned that we were gonna lose that information. So that was our priority. When it came to contacting the workers, in collaboration with Sebastian, who was in communication, we were waiting, right, until folks had bigger priorities and that they had lost, what they had known was their home, right? They had lost their shelter, aside from the devastation of of losing their colleagues, and they themselves almost being harmed in this situation. So it's very unraveling for them. So we communicated with partner organizations. I reached out myself to advise them that we are available when the workers are ready to talk. So it did take us a couple of weeks to get to interview the workers. We also reached out to the San Mateo District Attorney because my interest was for us to have a panel approach to the interviews, so these individuals didn't have to go through multiple interviews. So there was coordination on that level. And then we made sure that our team had all the updated information in terms of our victims of crimes brochures. We had some challenges with the Asian languages. I don't believe we had the language that we needed, but we did have the English and the Spanish. And the last piece was we communicated about the deferred action program, and we did expedite processing that request jointly with DOSH, which has been approved.
Great, thank you. And you touched on the deferred action program, and my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that your office was the first in California at the state level to pilot that, and that's part of what informed the state's decision to expand that to our other agencies, including ours. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with that and how it's been going? And would love to hear more information.
Sure. We were actually the first state agency in the country to submit a request for deferred action. And so we've been overwhelmed with requests. We need staff to be able to respond more timely. It's a challenge with us everywhere. I think we've received a little under 100 requests, and we've submitted about a dozen of them, and all have been approved. All requests that we have submitted have been approved. It's important to understand too that I think of all of our requests, I've only seen one from a farm worker. So this just underscores the topic, right, of what we're talking about, of we create these programs, we have new laws, but they're still not being utilized. You would think, we would be overwhelmed, right, with farm worker requests, and we're not being overwhelmed with those. So there's definitely, I think we need, the bodies on the ground, right, to continue working with organizations like CBDIO, to go walk them through. The process is relatively simple, but yet there's still confusion about it. And I think we also need to understand, I was very excited about this program. And I welcomed the communication with DHS, and they were very open. However, it's still very limiting, right? It's just 2 years of protection, and it does put workers on a radar, right? And so it's so important for there to be a community advocate, and that has been something that we've exercised discretion on requiring, because we can't have the immigration conversations, right, with our team. As Julie stated, we too don't ask the question and don't want to document any information about that. Even if a worker submits W-2s to us, we give them back. We don't take any of that information. So even though this is a good program, it's a step forward, but the fact that it isn't a pathway to citizenship, and that it does perpetuate additional risks, are difficult questions and conversations that we can't have. So that's why by having a community advocate attached to the requesting worker is the best situation. So figuring out how we're being responsible with this exciting new program, but understanding those limitations and how we can partner further with community advocates.
Thank you. Another question, this is for all of our panelists, and Julie, I might direct this to you just because I heard a little bit about it, but I want the benefit of everyone here. In the Maritson case, one of the things that the community-based organization that we partnered with, North Bay Jobs with Justice, really emphasized how the early engagement of our staff really helped build the success for that eventual charge and then complaint and then settlement. Julie, can you start, and then I want to open up to Sebastian and Lilia as well, maybe talk about the efforts in Santa Maria or other places about how we have effective early engagement with workers, because I think, as you've all discussed, particularly farm workers, they are busy. They have long days, they're tired, they have long ways to travel, limited time, limited financial resources. How do we start those conversations with them maybe before a problem has occurred so that they do know they can come to us? Can you talk about that, Julie?
Yes, absolutely. And I'll just start with the example of Maritson Farm, since it's very recent in our minds and you brought it up. So in that case, when we met with North Bay Jobs with Justice, they talked about how critical that was and to the success of this case. And they said that this was something different that they hadn't experienced with other government orgs. And they mentioned one federal department in particular that they had not as good of an experience with. But they said with the ALRB, they really felt more comfortable engaging with us, and the workers felt more comfortable engaging with us because we talked to them and met with them before any problems occurred. So the way our staff got connected with them is we had some of our local Santa Rosa staff, I think one of our attorneys and perhaps a field examiner as well, were at a community event tabling. And they went around and started introducing themselves to the other groups and CBOs that were also tabling and introducing themselves, saying who we are and what we do. And so that's how they met with North Bay Jobs with Justice. And then North Bay said, oh, well, these workers contacted us recently and they're H-2A workers and they have some questions and concerns. Could you talk to them? And so they facilitated our meeting with those workers. And of course, North Bay Jobs with Justice has been doing a lot of community building, organizing of local workers, including farm workers. So they already had established themselves in the trust in that community. And so they brought in our ALRB staff who did a presentation for the workers, sat down and met with them, told them what their rights are and what they can do, and said, hey, you have the right to come together and speak out about and request better working conditions. And it is illegal for your employer to retaliate against you, but if that does happen and you are retaliated against, we've got your back. You come to us, we'll support you. And that is exactly what happened. The workers initially met with the employer and together with North Bay, and they talked about all their issues, and the employer said, oh, thank you for bringing this to our attention, we'll address these problems, and don't worry, you won't be retaliated against, and you can even leave your stuff in our lockers so that when you come back next year, it's still there. However, following season, they weren't rehired, they weren't invited back. So at that point in time, they called our ALRB attorneys and said, hey, we want to take action. And so if it hadn't been for that early engagement at that presentation and the community event, this may have never occurred. And if our staff had simply sat at a table and waited for people to come to the table, might have never happened either. It was because they were proactive in going out. So I think that's just a good case in point of why we need to be at these community events, and we need to have staff funded to do this work. It's difficult, right? I mean, it takes a lot of time, energy, and effort. And we have all our staff doing this, not just the outreach staff. We have our attorneys, our field examiners, our clerical staff. I go out to events, everyone. So it's important to continue that engagement, because I think when we can show our faces places and see people and fund those efforts, that's when it will pay off over time.
Thank you. Lilia?
You're asking, how do we engage with workers early?
Yes, yeah, and success stories, whether it's the event at the Santa Maria Church, which I always see the advertisement, so good job on that, or anything else that comes to mind that you think might be informative for us.
Yeah, well, I think it's a combination of everything we're doing, right? We can't tire of doing all of these things. So it's building the relationships with community partners. As I mentioned in the Santa Maria Clinic, we had 6 of them there in November when we first met. We had 40 workers at our May workshop, and we had 3 workers file claims, and then we had 25 workers this week, right? And so I think our community partners, bringing in more partners to our clinic has been helpful. But also, as Sarai mentioned, training the CBO team members, like our Workplace Wrap Ambassadors Project does, right, to build their capacity to help them understand, because I think what the workers want is to believe that something's gonna, there's gonna be a positive outcome, right, of the time that they spend with us in filing their case. And what we incorporate in all of our engagements is around them documenting their hours, right? Them understanding who their employers are. I'm shocked, and I shouldn't be, but I'm still surprised, right, that so many workers still don't know, right, what they're being paid, who their employer is. They know the supervisor, right, who hired them directly or gave them the job, and that same applies with the FLCs, right? They may know somebody's name, So I think early engagement is super important, that we give them the tools for them to document the right information that they need, so that when they have a violation, they come into our office, we're not having to reconstruct all of that. And the last thing I'd say is we need to be able, as Julie said, to have the resources to engage the employer early too. So we've developed 2 types of early engagement programs, one with our retaliation complaint investigation unit during COVID, where all COVID-related retaliation cases, we offered the worker an option of, can we call your employer, explain what the law is, and see if you'll get back to work, right? Because so many workers were being fired for the mask mandate, right? Or be it with the customers, enforcing it with the customers. And we had positive response to that. So we're looking to expand that, because most workers just want to get back to their job, right? Versus having to wait in a long line. And now we're doing an early engagement program in our wage claim adjudication program, given our horrific backlog. But it's making sure that all the proper entities are named, because we have a lot of great tools on individual liability, on up the chain liability, right? The tools that Victoria, you were instrumental, and Ralph, you were instrumental in building. Well, guess what? We don't use them, right? Which drives me insane, right? So we're investing in building the training amongst our team and working with community partners, so that claims are more perfected when they're filed. And we're bringing on 32 industrial relations representatives, 2 per wage office, who that is what they're going to focus on, right? Is making sure that all the named entities are included. And we have found that 2 to 3 times those claims are more likely to resolve in settlement versus having to go through the whole process. So I'm sorry, I know I jumped into non-farm issues, but I think those are good examples to introduce in the conversation.
No, you touch on it. That's the sort of conversation that Ralph and I continue to have, is trying to figure out, there are a variety of tools and strategies that businesses engage in for a variety of reasons, but unfortunately one of the negative impacts can be, it can be hard to know who's got the pockets, who really has the right exposure. And we've been talking about trying to figure out sort of how to get to that next level, and having either presentation as well as additional training for our staff. We've thankfully had up-chain liability from the beginning of our act, but like Ralph was mentioning earlier, when there's other contractors involved and other kind of complex business arrangements, still trying to get whoever the ultimate grower is a challenge. Sebastian, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add on this point.
Just really quickly to contrast our experiences responding to the Half Moon Bay shooting and the Fallbrook shooting down in the San Diego area. In Half Moon Bay, one of the first things when I finally got in contact with the CBO, I let them supporting the workers, was no one from the state has ever come to this area, has engaged us, has engaged these farm workers. And we really struggled initially to set up meetings with the workers to gain their trust. And it took us a while to get our CalOSHA and LCO team to connect with the workers. As opposed to in Fallbrook, where we have been working with some of the organizations. So as soon as the shooting happened, we were able to contact CBOs who were having conversations directly with the impacted workers, who then we were able to set up with them a resource fair for those workers to meet with the various entities. And I think that just really demonstrates the value of building connections with community partners that can help build trusting relationships with workers, so workers know that we can provide support for them in various situations. So it's absolutely critical to have ongoing and early engagement with community-based organizations and partners that have day-to-day contact with these workers.
Great. Barry.
So switching topics slightly, amidst all of this meeting, attempts to meet with farm workers and talking to farm workers, filing charges with state agencies is good, it's great, but what about forming and joining unions, creating workers' committees, spontaneous strike activity? Are we seeing any changes in that side of the house?
I don't know if it changes, however, there has been, I think there's been an uptick in activity in the Santa Maria area. And I don't know to what extent that might be partially due to our efforts over there in addition to the labor commissioners and others' efforts, but certainly we've been doing a lot of outreach and support with the local nonprofit groups down there, My Cop and Cause, and doing presentations and workshops with them on ALRA rights to engage in concerted activity form and join unions to the extent the workers want to do that, et cetera. And there has been activity of spontaneous worker strikes, and we've actually sent staff out to observe some of those strikes and been on the ground there when they've occurred. There was one earlier this year at least, or several actually, I think. And so I don't know, but I think that there might be some, because we have that additional support and resource out there, it certainly, I think, doesn't hurt. So we have seen a little more uptick in that activity, especially during this past strawberry season. And it's been indigenous worker groups that have been striking.
Thank you.
If I could comment on, well, I don't have a response to Barry's question. But if I want to just go back to the previous conversation, Victoria, and your comments of, I think we have to, like, bills are these concepts, right, that get moved through, and through the legislative process, there is some evaluation of the practical application, but you never know, right? Unless there's a model, bill, law already in place that you can draw from. But we have to remember that we're kind of in a science lab, right? With the growth of these new tools. And we have yet to see how an industry responds, right? And like in all of our industries, the criminal elements are very resilient, right? And very innovative. So to maintain these legislative mandates that are intended to be tools to help us eliminate harm in the workplace, I think that we need to consider another area of work that government doesn't already have, and that's research, right? Every effective, comprehensive campaign has a research team, right? And so that's something that I've been exploring, because we have our judgment enforcement unit, right? That's 24 individuals. And even if we double that and triple that, it's not going to be enough, right? For us to chase those assets, just because of the nature of the beast, right? Of the underground economy. However, if I'm able to create a research unit that is able to do some probing, right? As leads come in, right? As we're developing cases and identify assets, right? And identify all the plaintiffs or defendants, excuse me, then it's more likely we're going to be successful, right? And this is something I've encouraged CBO partners to do as well, because it's generally in the unions, right? Where you have large research investment, but in so many of the CBOs, it's still a dream, right? To have a research department. But I think that's something valuable for us to consider I would consider redirecting investigators to a research unit just to focus on developing this information, right? And being able to move as swiftly as the crime does and being able to follow those assets. It's just something to think about for us to consider, to think out of the box a little.
Yeah, I really appreciate that comment. And Sebastian knows I'm there have been a lot of areas where I've kind of thought, particularly post-pandemic, having a study that really, and the farm worker health study that UC Merced and Department of Public Health partnered on gets at some of this, but I think studying like, I was really proud that the administration threw a lot of resources and energy during the pandemic, particularly in that first year of housing for the harvest, and we're gonna do this, we're gonna, give masks out through the labor or the ag commissioners and different things, but, and the vaccine, the testing programs and the vaccine programs, but trying to study, okay, what worked, what didn't, what can we improve upon, and get a little bit more of that data. And for years, I've also been saying, there was the famous 2010 wage theft study in LA. We've seen a lot of changes in our own minimum wage, other labor laws, ag overtime. I would love to see a statewide wage theft study that looks at, like, do we see, okay, employers in certain regions are paying this much, but after this, it's cutting off. Is it delay in payment? Is it only paying X percentage of the wage, or is it no payment at all, and how they're doing that? Are we seeing gender differences? Are we seeing certain groups being discriminated against, et cetera? I'd love to see something like that. Tough to ask for if we're in a tight budget year, but hopefully someone can take that and carry it. One thing I wanted to ask you about, Lilia, that I've been wondering, I know under now Acting Labor Secretary Sue, when she was Labor Commissioner, she started a community college course to try and create kind of her own feeder system for Labor Commissioner staff. Is that still going on at all, or a version of that, do you know?
It is not going on. The challenge has been the interest at, we were at LA Trade Tech, right? So we were at one community college. It was terminated prior to my appointment, so I don't know why they did that. We are interested in engaging again with them. What I learned is the requirements for the instructor is a bit of a challenge for us. You need a master's, right, to be an instructor. So we have few folks on that. And our work with the community colleges, Cal States and UCs, I focused more on building career pathways with that initiative with UCLA, that with the labor centers where we have workshops, demonstrating, helping people apply to state service, right? Demystifying, being more transparent about the process. That's where we have focused our attention with the community colleges and the CSUs and the UCs.
That's good to know. Well, I support those efforts, and kind of one of the things that made me think about it was as we've had meetings with various groups, particularly in the Valley, and recruitment challenges in certain geographic areas. How do we build that capacity? And I feel like labor is going through a movement right now. There's so much interest, but how do we get someone who's, a young person in college who's, going to Starbucks and seeing organizing efforts, reading about what's happening at Trader Joe's and whatnot, says, hey, I want to do this. How do we connect them into the state? And I think that's it's a great career path for people. We need people who are passionate, and thankfully I know both you and the Labor Commissioner work really hard, our General Counsel work really hard to recruit good folks, but we need to be building that candidate pool. And right. Sebastian, I know you.
I could share with you, Victoria, our Career Pathways program with UCLA, and that the idea is once it is being built right now, but then we're going to take it UC-wide. And I've already started one conversation with CSU Dominguez Hills. And I'm interested to also get to East LA College. These would be our next two test cases for these other two systems. But that's exactly the purpose of it, right? Is how to create, you know, a regular awareness around the opportunities, the employment opportunities in state service, and in particular to draw them into the LCO.
That's great. I'll follow up with you on that.
I'll just call attention to the California Youth Leadership Corps. This is a partnership that the labor agency has been in with several community colleges and the chancellor's office to create learn and earn career pathways for youth from low-income communities, youth of color, opportunity youth, particularly to enter career pathways into community-based immigration legal services and interpret language justice career pathways. So this is something that we've been working on over the past couple of years and are looking to expand. And I think there might be an opportunity here to think about how we create more pathways into our various enforcement entities to become investigators. So it is something that as a labor agency we've been thinking about how we can use our workforce development system to create these pathways into these types of positions.
Thank you, and I'll see if any of my colleagues have any final questions. I know we've kept our panelists going pretty long. I'm so appreciative of your time and all the work that you do. And I'll be following up on a lot of these resources that we've been discussing, but just thank you so much. And again, thank you to Member Flores for putting this together.
I would join in that. Thank you very much, all of you. Very helpful.
You too. Great. Okay. All right, thank you, panelists. And colleagues, we'll next be going into closed session. We'll be gaveling into closed session really quick, yeah. I'll look at my colleagues. Do you want to take a break or try and go straight through?
I have a 3:30 doctor's appointment,
Okay.
so if we take, I mean, I just don't know how long this is gonna take, but.
I don't know. Maybe we should go into it and then we can kind of see if it's going to be long. Okay. Cynthia and Isidore, does that sound okay to you? Can we gavel into closed session, and if we need to take a break,
Sure,
Yes,
get
that
a sense
works.
for how long it might be?
That works.
yes, absolutely.
Okay. We'll see you in a few moments. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Labor Commissioner. Great to see you.